Today, Broad Street is loud. Cars inch forward. Horns overlap. People walk fast, eyes fixed ahead. Hawkers balance trays. Office workers squeeze past them. Paper changes hands. Phones ring. Someone is late. Someone is tired. Someone has been here all their life. But Broad Street did not begin this way. Long before it was called Broad Street, this land belonged to water, footpaths, and families. It was part of Isaleko, the original Lagos. People lived close to the lagoon. They fished. They traded. They knew one another. Life moved at the speed of the tide and the sun. There were no wide roads, no offices, no banks, just land, water, and community. The street was born when outsiders arrived. Ships came more often. Europeans arrived with trade interests, missionaries, and political intentions. Freed Africans returned too. These were the people who had been taken away and found their way back. The Saro from Sierra Leone, the Aguda from Brazil and Cuba. They came with new ideas, new skills, and deep memories. Broad Street was laid out differently from the rest of Lagos. It was wider, straighter, planned. It was meant to function, to move goods, to organize power, to look orderly. That decision, to make it wide, shaped everything that followed. The street became a meeting point between Africa and Europe, between tradition and modernity, between the past and what was being built. By the mid-1800s, Broad Street was busy but not chaotic. People worked here: clerks, traders, missionaries, accountants, shipping agents. African professionals in suits walked the same street as British administrators. They shared space, but not power. In 1861, Lagos was formally annexed by the British. Broad Street became official. Offices rose. Paperwork multiplied. Money moved through hands and ledgers. Decisions made on this street affected lives far beyond it. Produce from interior passed through here. Palm oil, cocoa, goods and documents flowed toward the port. Broad Street became a place where Lagos learned how system worked. African men worked as clerks and interpreters. They learned the language of contracts and bureaucracy. They watched how power moved, quietly, through documents and meetings, not noise. This street taught people how to negotiate modern life. By the early 1900s, Broad Street was one of the most important streets in West Africa. Banks opened their doors. Law offices appeared. Newspapers were printed nearby. Conversations happened in hallways and back rooms. Ideas formed slowly. Some of the men who walked the street during the day would later write at night. Others founded newspapers that challenged colonial rule. One of the earliest nationalists, Herbert Macaulay, was born on Broad Street itself to returning parents. The street shaped him long before he shaped politics. There was no shouting revolution here, just steady thinking, planning, organizing. Nationalism grew in places like this, not in crowds, but in offices, in reading rooms, in conversations after work. Broad Street helped fund independence before it ever arrived. Lawyers, businessmen, and journalists who walked this road believed Nigeria could govern itself and prepared for it quietly. For a while, it thrived. The street was Nigerian now. The buildings remained, but the faces changed. Confidence filled the air. Lagos felt like a city with a future that made sense. Then the city grew faster than the street could handle. The oil boom of the 1970s brought money, people, and pressure. Lagos expanded outward. New neighborhoods promised space, comfort, and quiet. The wealthy and the powerful began to leave Broad Street behind. They moved to Ikoyi, to Victoria Island, later to Ikeja and Lekki, but Broad Street stayed. The buildings aged, maintenance slowed, traffic worsened. What was once elite became crowded. What was once orderly became improvised. But life did not disappear. It adjusted. Small businesses moved in. Offices were divided into smaller spaces. Traders occupied the edges. Hawkers learned where to stand without blocking movement. Informal systems filled the gaps left by formal ones. During the 1980s and the 1990s, Nigeria struggled. The economy tightened. Jobs became uncertain. Broad Street reflected that tension. People came here to survive, not to make history. Petty crime appeared, paper fraud, hustling, shortcuts. Nothing dramatic, just pressure showing itself in everyday ways. Still, the street worked. Banks remained. Businesses opened and closed. People showed up every morning. Broad Street became less about prestige and more about persistence. Today, Broad Street carries many layers at once. It is no longer the center of power. That moved on. But it is still a center of effort. People come here to work, to sell, to process documents, to move money, to make something small work in a difficult system. Some have been here for decades. Others arrived last week. Most don't think about history. They think about rent, about traffic, about closing time. Yet the past lives quietly in the buildings, in the layouts of the road, in the way institutions still cluster here, in the fact that people continue to believe this street matters, even if they don't say it out loud. Broad Street is not beautiful in the way new places try to be. It is honest. It shows what happens when a city grows faster than memory, but not faster than need. It shows how people adapt when systems age. It shows how dignity survives in routine. This street has held power, ambition, disappointment, and endurance. It has watched people arrive hopeful and leave tired. It has stayed when others moved on. Broad Street doesn't ask to be remembered. It just keeps going. And if you walk slowly enough, if you pay attention, you realize that the story of Broad Street is not about buildings or banks or decline. It is about people showing up every day in a place that has seen everything and in choosing to keep living anyway.